Hi, I'm Steve Clemons, and I have a question. Will the U.S. attack on Iran end its nuclear ambitions or just make things worse? Let's get to the bottom line. Hours after saying he wanted 2 weeks to think about whether or not to join Israel in bombing Iran, President Donald Trump gave the order for a bunker-busting bomb attack that put the United States in the middle of a major conflict. B-2 bombers flew from Missouri and dropped 30,000-pound bombs onto Fordo, a uranium enrichment facility buried underneath a mountain south of Tehran. American submarines then launched dozens of cruise missiles on other nuclear facilities in Natanz and Isfahan. Trump says Iran's enrichment facilities have been, quote, completely and totally obliterated. But military experts say they're not so sure. So what has Trump achieved by attacking Iran? And what options does Iran have now? Today, we're talking with political scientist Vali Nasr, a professor at Johns Hopkins University and author most recently of Iran's Grand Strategy, A Political History. Vali, thank you so much for joining us today. Listen, you were on our show not too long ago. We were talking about your book, and I asked you, what you felt in your gut about the tensions of this moment as you sort of saw Iran and the United States dancing around a potential negotiation, which a lot of the region wanted. And you said you've never felt the situation more dire and potentially more cataclysmic. That was your word, cataclysmic. Now we've had a cataclysm. How are you seeing things at this moment?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me back. I wish we were talking under better circumstances, but in a way, the worst has happened. You had an Israeli attack on Iran that came 2 days before a scheduled meeting between the United States and Iran over the nuclear issue, which was bad enough. It exploded the Iran-Israel conflict into a direct war. And now the United States has entered into it. And we have entered now a period that is unpredictable, that is quite dangerous, and it's unlikely to end anytime soon. So yes, I think it's dire. It's dire for Iran, definitely. It's dire for the United States if it becomes a bigger war. But it could be dire for all of Iran's neighbors, which are in line to be collateral damage in a larger conflict.
Did Iran stumble in this case? Was this Iran's fault, this moment?
I mean, if you looked at the long duration, you could put a lot of fault in Iran, from October 7th to missile attacks on Israel to even, older things. But in a very short time frame that we're looking at, they were seriously engaged in nuclear talks with the U.S. They thought that this was a good faith effort, enough that their commanders were not in bunkers hiding, expecting that there would not be a military outcome if the talks were still ongoing and there was a chance that they would succeed. So they see their main failure at this point, that they did not think that President Trump may actually green light an Israeli attack before the last round of the talks had concluded. So I think that's where they misread the situation, and they were caught by surprise by the Israeli attack.
Do you think that if these talks had gone on, knowing what you know about Iran, and you know a lot about Iranian nationalism, national pride, its energy program, and I think a lot of the turbulence and toxicity about Iran's nuclear program is whether or not it's designed to produce warheads and weapons, or whether it's for peaceful uses. The world is very much divided on this, but a lot of our allies, including those in Europe, but also the United States, the UK, and clearly Israel, saw Iran setting itself up to be a potential warhead maker and become a nuclear power, from a nuclear weapons power, as opposed to a peaceful use of nuclear energy power. Do you think it was trying to blur those lines?
No, I mean, maybe, but you see, the fault also lies with the United States, Europeans, and Israel as well. I mean, the more you threaten Iran, the more likely it is that they will blur the line. And now that you've attacked them, they're definitely going to blur the line. And we had a nuclear deal in 2015, which reduced the scope of Iran's program significantly. And if obviously you put your threshold that they have to have absolutely no program, well, that wasn't going to fly.
That was the JCPOA, just for our listeners to know, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action under the Obama administration.
That's right. So JCPOA basically limited Iran's program to something that would be completely civilian. President Trump left it. This time around, they were talking. Iran said, if you don't want us to have a bomb, you want assurances about that, we can negotiate to give you all the inspection assurances levels that you want, but we want to retain the right to enrich a minimum amount because, first of all, that's our inherent right as a member of the NPT. Every country who signed on to the NPT has a right to enrich, and Iran is not a second-class citizen in international affairs, so it doesn't want to give up that right as a national right. And secondly, Iran does claim that it has uses for low-enriched uranium for medical purposes, cancer treatment, and fuel for its one nuclear reactor. Now, President Trump, it's possible that you could have negotiated this. President Trump started by saying, I don't want to have Iran have a bomb. And in the middle of the negotiations, he changed the goalpost and said, no, I don't want you to have any enrichment at all. And the Iranians were saying we can come up with a creative formula to bridge the gap between us. But it seems now, in retrospect, that President Trump was actually not negotiating with Iran. He was looking for a deal without negotiations. He wanted Iran to agree to the end result without actually negotiating it. And anyways, before even getting there, he pulled the plug. Now, if you basically attack a country, you say you no longer have proxies to defend you. Your missiles don't scare us. We've destroyed all your air defense systems, so we now own your skies. And we're going to hit you every day of the week that we want to. Well, you basically are giving that country total encouragement to go nuclear because that remains the only deterrence to protect themselves. So, in fact, the United States is actually almost as guaranteed that Iran will go nuclear if up to this point Iran did not have a bomb, did not want a bomb. Now the argument that they should go down that path is much stronger than it was before.
I want to ask this question delicately. To a certain degree, when you kind of look at this situation, President Trump came out, at least officially, overtly discouraging Israel from taking overt action and attacking Iran. And many people in his world, from Steve Bannon, one of the kind of chief ideological people outside of his administration, Tulsi Gabbard, the director of national intelligence, in the media, Tucker Carlson, were very much of the mindset that Donald Trump had won the presidency by running against this kind of conflict, against forever wars and picking fights with neighbors in the areas. So it raises the question of how that equation changed, and essentially Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, basically coming in and somehow getting in Donald Trump's head and encouraging him to take this action. I ask this because, as you just talked about, the kind of nation that Iran wants to be and become, it raises the question of what kind of nation Israel needs. Does it need an Iran that acquiesces to it, or does it need an Iran that actually is a challenge to it?
Well, you could say that for a very long period of time, and there are theories about this, that perhaps Prime Minister Netanyahu benefited from an Iran that was a bogey out there because it allowed him to become the longest-serving Prime Minister of Israel, presented himself as the Churchill of Israel, the one man who's going to defend it against the biggest threat in the region, which was Iran. But it also created for a long time a situation where Israel could have its cake and eat it too. It could not negotiate with the Palestinians. It could expand settlements. It could envision a greater amount of Palestinian lands being appropriated by Israel, but at the same time, making peace with the Arab states around the region around an anti-Iran alliance. And all of that obviously unraveled after October 7th. Now, there's what might be in Israel or Prime Minister Netanyahu's mind, but there's also how the region is reading this past 2 years, and particularly this moment. What the region sees is an Israel that is triumphant, is very confident in its military capabilities, wants to settle every security challenge in the region by military force without any restraint from the United States and Europe. So in a way, what we are witnessing is not just a debate about Iran's nuclear program, but is also what kind of a Middle East there would be once the dust settles, with Israel having this kind of a dominant military presence in the region. It would then want to settle the Palestinian issue at will. It would want to decide the future of Syria by its own. It wants to dictate essentially a regional order, and countries or groups that stand in its way potentially would have to look at the example of Iran or Hezbollah as what might happen to them.
Vali, I want to show you a pretty remarkable tweet from Donald Trump, that it's not politically correct to use the term regime change, but if the current Iranian regime is unable to make Iran great again, all in caps, why wouldn't there be regime change with a lot of question marks? MIGA, make Iran great again, exclamation point. So, Vali, a lot of the White House team engaged in this military action have been going out of their way to make it clear that the United States is not interested in regime change. That is not what this is about. That is not what Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu is saying. He's trying to embrace regime change whole hog, basically tell the Iranian people this is their opportunity. And then the president offers a tweet like this. What's your take?
Well, I think the president is showing certain degree of frustration because I think he thought that, bombing Iran would then immediately bring Iranians to the table. And they're not coming to the table. They're right now holding the right to retaliate, and that's creating a great deal of nervousness in energy markets, in Gulf countries. In fact, the president also tweeted today that that everybody should pay attention, that the price of oil shouldn't go up. It wasn't very clear who was that directed at, but it showed that he was very anxious about higher oil prices. And I think he's escalating the rhetoric with Iran on his own. But actually, this only creates greater anger in Tehran, and it makes it much more difficult to deal with them. First of all, the U.S. really doesn't have a regime change option here, unless it's going to put boots on the ground, and like in Iraq or Afghanistan, shows up in the capital city and then installs somebody else in power. Right now, there is no evidence that the Iranian public is ready to rise or wants to rise. In fact, the Iranian public right now is worried about their safety, is anxious, and it's also very angry at a war that has been foisted on them. Yes, they may hold the Islamic Republic responsible for following policies that has brought about this moment, but it's Israeli and American bombs that are falling on them. Hundreds of thousands of people from the capital city have gone into countryside, have left the country, are sort of virtual refugees inside and outside of Iran because President Trump and Israeli defense minister told them that they need to evacuate large parts of Tehran, and so the regime change in the sense that it's in President Trump's imagination is not a short-term thing. It's not going to solve the Iran issue tomorrow, but this kind of rhetoric makes it more difficult for him to get the Iranians to the table, which is what he wants to happen.
We hear a lot about the 1953 U.S.-led and U.K.-led coup that led to the falling of Mohammad Mossadegh in 1953. He was democratically elected because we were worried about, oil and controlling oil at that time. And this comes up repeatedly, and we saw that moment as something that has led in a way to this paranoia in Iran about its security, about its tensions, led to a lot of the bipolarity, if you will, of the Iranian system. But has this undermined what we've just seen, any sense of the progressives, of the Javad Zarifs, of the people that have been trying to be more moderate voice in Iran? Are they now out of business because of what's happened?
They're all united in defending their country. Even secular Iranians I know who have nothing to do with the regime, hate the regime. This is a moment their country is under attack. And they're not going to side with those who are invading or attacking their country. Iranians are also maybe anti-regime, maybe pro-regime, maybe moderate, maybe neutral, but end of the day, they're patriots. I mean, imagine when 9/11 happened, in American minds, whether you were Republican or you were Democrat, you basically united against the threat from the outside. And it sort of requires a suspension of disbelief to think that Iranians would, at this moment in time, be concerned about how they would serve American agenda when it's America that's dropping bombs on them, when it's Israel that's dropping bombs on them. And then you talked about 1953. If the United States and Britain carried out the coup, it was not obvious at the time being. There was a change of government that happened supposedly at the hands of Iranians, with the foreigners being in the background. This time, we're actually, the United States or Israel are asking Iranians to be outright collaborators, or a particular Iranian political leader to act as a collaborator with an invading army. It's almost like thinking about those who are familiar with World War II history, that the Vichy government in France would be popular and acceptable to the French because it was installed by an invading Nazi army. So, right in a condition of war, unless America and Israel were to be in Tehran and install their puppet on the throne of government, it's fantasy to think that the people would do that. Secondly, the United States right now has a short-term problem of what does it do with Iran next week, a week after that. And regime change, at best, is a hope. It's not a policy right now. There is no evidence that Iranians are rising up. There's no evidence of a leadership that would take over. These are all sort of fantastical theories that there's no evidence for them. And so long as there's no evidence for them, whatever the president tweets, it actually does not address the issue that's right in front of him. How do we get to a ceasefire? How do we get to a nuclear deal? How can I avoid going to the next level of the war, which could eventually get me into a full-fledged, boots on the ground war on Iran, which Americans don't want, my own base doesn't want? And regime change is neither here nor there. It's not a solution to any of this.
I'm just sort of interested, if you're Iran, on one hand, are the United States and Israel clipping Iran's wings so effectively that it essentially has no choice and no ability to really fight back? And so becoming docile, just acquiescing to the moment may be the right strategy.
Well, we don't know, because we're not in the mind of the Iranian regime, and we don't know what their own assessment is. But what's very clear, they have been fighting. And Israel was very successful in assassinating a number of very key generals at the beginning. But since then, the regime immediately was able to mount a counterattack and is carrying it out. And it's ongoing. So we have to be careful about overreading Israel's achievement. In fact, what you said about how at the beginning of October 7th, Israel was surprised for the first year of the war. It looked like this axis of resistance led by Iran with Hezbollah, Hamas, Houthis was doing very well. And then in the second year of the war, the tide turned spectacularly. So we have to be careful not to overread into the early success in a war. If this conflict right now ends up being much longer, maybe the picture that we're seeing today will not be the picture that we will be seeing in a month's time or in 6 months' time. And there's no question that Israel's fantastic intelligence coup with Hezbollah, with Iran, was extremely effective. But it looks like at this moment, that intelligence coup has run its course. It's no longer deciding the direction that Iran is attacking, its capabilities, etc. And so we have to see, can Israel continue that intelligence ability, or that we might also witness that this will settle into a much longer war, and then, or that Iran might have surprises there. So I don't want to say that Iranians are necessarily ready to surrender. I think it's exactly the fact that the president doesn't see that willingness to surrender that shows his frustration in these tweets.
You're a professor of international relations, and you've got great understanding of historic context. When I look at Russia, and I'm not going to say it's right or wrong, but I think Russia felt somewhat humiliated after the fall of the Soviet Union, as it was treated, lost control of a lot of issues, and felt humiliated. China, after thousands of years of preeminence in the world, went through a period of profound humiliation. Donald Trump seems to be wanting to find victory in the humiliation of Iran, and that's my reading, that's going to be a reading of success. What does humiliation do to a nation of 92 million people with the thousands and thousands of years of history?
So in the very short run, I think it would cause more people to rally to support the government or rally to the flag. It will make Iranians more resistant to the United States, and at least gives the Islamic Republic a greater lease on life and certain degree of strategic depth as it's fighting against Israel and the United States. In the long term, regardless of whether it's the Islamic Republic or some other regime that's ruling over Iran, this humiliation will play out in bad ways. This is not going to go away very quickly if you humiliate Iranians. You mentioned that 1953, British American support for a coup in Iran is still reverberating. You and I are still talking about it. And that's about 70 years ago. And so I think this is extremely bad for the long-term relationship between Iran and the United States. I think the Iranians right now will dig in more, the population will dig in more, and they will fight, and then things will have their own direction. I mean, logically, if you hit Iran over the nuclear issue, you want to create a circumstance and political cover for them to be able to come to the table, to keep their head high and come to the table. The more you humiliate them, the less likely it is that you can have a peaceful end to this crisis, or to have, proper relations with Iran and Iranians going forward past this moment.
Real quickly, Vali, Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader, we now have reported that he's already announced their 3 potential successors. One of the things I think many people don't understand about Iran is how well organized that system is as a complex system. If you're Ali Khamenei and you're realizing your days may be numbered either because you're 86 years old or because someone is trying to take you out, what are you thinking right now? If you're in the clergy, what do you not want to have happen in these next days and months?
So, you have to think that Ali Khamenei doesn't see himself as a cleric. He's now the commander-in-chief of Iran's military forces in the middle of a war. And he's doing war planning. So the leak that he has selected 3 people. He has also named all the potential commanders that would success other commanders if they were killed. So what he's signaling to the outside is that we are prepared for whatever eventuality happens, for assassinations, bombings, sudden deaths, etc., and that the system will go on and will fight on. We're not going to collapse. That's what that message means. It's not about religion. It's about the fact. It's about giving Iranians and the United States, Israel, etc., a very clear message that we're not about to collapse, and we have contingency planning.
Right.
And the state will survive and go forward.
Well, we'll have to end it there. Vali Nasr, author of Iran's Grand Strategy and professor of international relations at Johns Hopkins University. Really appreciate your candor and joining us today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So what's the bottom line? The irony of the situation is that Iran's place in the world today was cast by the United States decades ago. In 1953, the grandson of U.S. President Theodore Roosevelt led a CIA-manufactured coup against Iran's democratically elected president, creating decades of resentment. Also in the 1950s, the United States actually started Iran's nuclear program, the same one that's being bombed now. The fact is, America is still in the regime-toppling business and still willing to deploy its arsenal to shape the world order, or at least to try to shape the world order in a way that President Trump actually campaigned against. We don't know how Iran will respond or what endpoint either Israel or the U.S. see for this conflict. What we do know for sure is that the global rules are just gone. It has become a might makes right world. And lots of other countries, including Russia, China, Israel, just to name a few, are learning from America's example. And that's the bottom line.